Now we're going to get into, I think this is probably one of the more intriguing, this is probably the most intriguing discussion that we're going to have today, because we kind of know what Devin is, as much as we do want to continue to see him ascend. Like we know his foundation. And
Mhm.
then with Malachi Branham, who we're going to talk about a little later, as much as, we're not completely out on Malachi Branham, it kind of seems like he's probably, I mean, he's going to really have to fight for some minutes
Yeah.
if he even gets any, which leads us to who we're about to talk about, which is Stephon Castle. And we know next season that Stephon Castle, is probably going to be the point guard for the Spurs after Chris Paul's 1-year contract in San Antonio. And that's obviously kind of what we drafted him for, and all of that draft discussion that we talked about. Y'all can go check out all of our other videos that we made throughout the months of May, April, and June on all that, if you want to hear our thoughts there. But this season, he's probably going to be playing the 2 off the bench next to Trey Jones. Maybe we will see him in some spot minutes, in games that Chris Paul sits, or if he's injured, where he'll be in the starting lineup or be the backup point guard off the bench, however it plays out with the coaching staff. But what are your thoughts on Stephon Castle's role this season? How do you feel like he's going to fit into the bench rotation mainly? And what are kind of your thoughts on, now that he is legit on the team and we kind of have an idea of what these rotations are going to be after free agency and everything? How do you think he fits into everything? Is, I guess, what I'm trying to ask.
I think the skills that he immediately brings allow him to fit pretty seamlessly in that second unit. He has, the tools at 6'5", long, lanky, high energy player, terrific point of attack defender. I think defensively, he'll have a role similar to what Asar Thompson had with Detroit last year. I don't know if y'all remember, but at one point he was one of the best perimeter defenders in the league and was switching basically 1 through 4.
Right.
Maybe you can make the argument that Stephon's not as tall, as physical, who knows, but maybe at least switching 1 through 3 and just be a dog defensively, and that's where his 99% of attention is going to be. Offensively, he needs to definitely have the ball in his hand, but it won't be as often, I think, as a lot of people think, because he's playing next to Trey Jones, and obviously you have Chris Paul, but we'll definitely see a large sample size of him as the primary ball handler. And I think he'll just be mainly a cutter and a playmaker offensively. His jump shot looked nice in the summer league, but he also, for every great one that he hit, he also bricked a handful. But he does have that confidence to take the shot. But as far as scoring the ball, he'll mostly be scoring in transition, off of cuts, or wide open threes. He'll still take them. I think we're going to want him to take them. But luckily, we won't really need him to score that much initially off the bench, because Trey has a little bit of the inside game, and he's getting more comfortable as a three-point shooter. We saw that at the end of the year. Keldon Johnson is also a big scorer off the bench. You have Zach, who can post up. And then I don't know where you're going to go back up power forward-wise, maybe Mamu, but Mamu can space the floor. He has some skills to put it on the floor as well. So there's a lot of versatility in that second unit. And I think Stephon will also get a lot of play time with the starting lineup, predominantly Victor Wembanyama. So pick and roll play will be big for him in those situations. I think that when he's playing with Victor, it'll be a lot of pick and roll, pick and pop with Victor, so we can start building up their chemistry. But if we're just going to base it off numbers, like what am I expecting him to average? I don't think it's going to be crazy.
Right.
I think a lot of people that don't watch the game will look at his box scores and be like, what's going on? Why is he not going crazy? He's the 4th overall pick. And we'll have to be the bearer of news, Jude, and be like, listen, y'all need to watch the game. He's doing a lot of intangible things that aren't showing up on the stat sheet, predominantly defense and just high IQ basketball.
One of the things that I was thinking about when you were talking about Stephon, specifically when you mentioned his cuts, and this just ties into all the stuff we talked about with the base that he got from Dan Hurley at UConn, and how he said he went to UConn to learn how to win, even though he was a point guard coming out of high school. He is such a connective piece. Like, he is a basketball player. Like, he is going to be a point guard. The point guard of our future is how we view him as of August 22nd, 2024. But he is someone who proved last year that he can play in a different role and be effective. And like you're saying, it's going to take probably a couple years for him to kind of get that 3-point jump shot down. It's obviously not completely broken, kind of like Lou told us, but there is some room for work as well. I think that was kind of my takeaway from Summer League watching him. But throughout all that, I mean, his off-ball movement inside, I saw some cuts in Summer League. You see it all over the UConn tape. Man, I could I could go on and on about all of this, but I don't want to repeat everything that we said,
Sure.
in the
Yeah,
draft process. But the main thing is that he showed last year, and I know UConn is different than the NBA. There's a different level of athlete, there's a different level of talent that he's going to have to adjust to, and there's going to be things he's going to have to learn. One, he's got Greg Popovich to help him out. I think that's a pretty good starting base. And
for sure.
two, the other thing I would say is that even with everything that I just mentioned, what he showed at UConn last year is that he can be that. Like he can play in a different role and be effective just cutting towards the rim, even being a glass cleaner at times, creating second chance opportunities. Like there's always something purposeful that Stephon Castle is doing when he's on the floor, whether that's offensively or defensively. So, right, if people look at the box score and they see 9, 6, and 4 from Stephon Castle off the bench next season, why isn't the number 4 overall pick, like, this is supposed to be our next superstar next to Wemby? What's he doing? Why is he sucking? Blah, 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 blah. It's like, there's a context to this team.
Mm-hmm.
He's not going to start over Chris Paul in his rookie season.
No.
You know what I mean? And he's not really, again, he's kind of in a similar situation to the UConn scenario last year, at least for this season, where we get him acclimated to the Spurs. And also, as we go throughout the season, we've talked about this ad nauseum as well, that he is going to get gradually more reps and ball handling duties
Mm-hmm.
as the season progresses. And like you said, I'm really glad you brought up the Victor point. I think we're going to see that. And what that brought into my mind is I think we will see a good bit of Stephon Castle, Devin Vassell, and Victor Wembanyama all on the floor together at times this season. Because we talked about, too, with Chris Paul being almost 40, we're not going to be riding him for 40 minutes a game. You know
Right.
what I mean?
Yeah.
He'll probably, I think last episode we said he'll probably be more in that 27 to 32 minute range, probably. So that will allow for more opportunities for that. And when I was thinking of that, the Devin Vassell, Stephon Castle backcourt.
Defense will be crazy.
And I know that this is the shooting guard breakdown, and we're kind of talking about him playing the two, but I think we're going to see that this season, and seeing that in the future definitely gets me excited, to say the least.
1,000%. And honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if our first two players off the bench are Stephon to come in for Chris, and then Keldon to come in for Harrison.
Right.
And then immediately we have our 5 core. What some people might even want to be our starting lineup to go
Right.
full team rebuild in the game together, getting reps, which would definitely be fun to watch.
And think about Stephon and Keldon, like the
Oh,
energy that those two would bring coming off the bench together.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. That would literally mean Keldon's the only weak defender, and physically he's not weak. He just gets
Right.
less communication wise. But if we can get that remedied with having another year under his belt with leadership like Chris Paul
Right.
Harrison, then maybe there's more potential for him to grow there too.
And as Two Clutch Corey says, that will be great defense, especially with Sohan in there, pure switchability. So if you have a lineup where you got, and I know you were talking about, obviously we're going to sub guys out there, but having Wemby, Sohan, and Stephon all on the floor together.
Crazy. And one last thing on
Go
Stephon
ahead.
I didn't mention. While I say yes, he will split duties ball handling wise with Chris Paul and with Trey Jones, and it'll probably ramp up like you're saying. I still think that his vision is exceptional, and he'll have ability to showcase that as an off guard. He doesn't necessarily have to have the ball 100% of the time to showcase that. He can be a connective piece and make a play off of the catch. I think that's a big part of his game that a lot of people haven't talked about yet. But as an off-ball mover, catching it off a floppy pump fake, make a play for somebody else. That's definitely within his arsenal of tools.
Absolutely. And here, I'm trying to look up exactly what his statistics were for last season, because I don't think it was anything crazy. Yeah, last year when he was the unanimous Big East Freshman of the Year, only averaged 11 points, 5 rebounds, and 3 assists in 27 minutes per game. That's not crazy numbers, but there's a reason that across the league he was, some discussions had him even going top 3.
Yeah,
Everybody had him at least in the top 5. He was number 1 on a lot of people's big boards. And again, we don't need to rehash all of that, but that ties into his role at UConn. So that's why, again, this just gives me confidence. He's essentially going to be the glue guy off the bench this
yes,
season. Yes, we will see him in point guard situations throughout the year, especially later in the year, probably as well. But he is really just going to be that connective, go play defense, go be a hound, help out in whatever way that you can. Like I said, it's really a very similar role to the role he played at UConn last season, but just off the bench for the Spurs.
Very exciting.
And yeah, I mean, I'm trying to think of, I don't really have too much. I mean, he's going to have to learn basic NBA stuff, like when it
Mhm.
comes to defensive rotations and like, just there's things that every rookie comes into the league and it's different and that they have to learn. But I don't really have too many criticisms there. And then we talked about offensively, it really just comes down to the jump shot. And in the inside the arc, there's not a ton to criticize there as well. And obviously, this is another 19-year-old player. Like that's the context that we're talking about this. And if you're coming into here and thinking like, why aren't they talking about the potential struggles that they could have next year? They're thinking that everything's just good. It's like we'll get into our season predictions before the season starts. Once we finish this all up, we are not going to go crazy with where the Spurs are at, but also we're not going to go crazy if Stephon Castle is just playing his role off the bench and the stats aren't, super popping, if you will, either.
Right. Well said.
And Corey says the defense speaks for itself. He's ridiculously talented as a point of attack defender.
Right on.